The snow fell in lazy, swirling flakes, blanketing the small town of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in a soft, white hush. The streets were lined with glowing Christmas lights, casting an ethereal glow on the icicles that dangled from rooftops. Children bundled in scarves and mittens tugged sleds through the snow, their laughter echoing through the chilly air. It was December, a season of joy and warmth for most, but not for the dog who lay alone in the biting cold at the edge of town, waiting, always waiting. Locals had come to know him simply as Ghost. His thick golden fur was now matted and dull, his ribs visible beneath his thin frame. Every winter, for the past 4 years, Ghost had returned to the same patch of snow by the roadside just outside the Thompson family farm, curling up under the skeletal remains of an old oak tree. No matter how hard the blizzards roared or how low the temperature dropped, the dog never left. "He's been here since the Thompsons moved out," explained Claire Simmons, the owner of the nearby general store. "For Christmases now. It's like he's waiting for something, or someone." It was Claire who first noticed him, back in December of 2020. She'd been closing the shop for the night when she spotted the dog limping down the road, his paw prints forming a crooked trail in the fresh snow. Thinking he was lost, she tried to coax him closer with leftover turkey from her dinner. But Ghost had only stared at her with those haunting, amber eyes before retreating into the shadows. The rumors started soon after. Some believed he was a stray who had been abandoned by travelers passing through. Others whispered he was a spirit, tethered to the farm by some tragic event. No one knew the truth, and no one could catch him to find out. But the real story, the one that would break hearts across the town, began 4 years ago, on Christmas Eve. It was a story of love, loss, and a loyalty so fierce it defied even the cruelest winters. In December 2019, the Thompson family had been a cornerstone of the community. Daniel and Melissa Thompson, along with their 7-year-old son Jack, had lived on the farm for nearly a decade. They were the kind of family that hosted summer barbecues and Christmas tree lighting parties, their home always filled with laughter and warmth. And then there was Cooper, their golden retriever, the heart and soul of the family. Cooper wasn't just a dog. He was Jack's best friend. From the moment they brought him home as a wiggly puppy, he had been Jack's constant companion. They were inseparable, whether exploring the woods behind the farm or snuggling under the covers during thunderstorms. Cooper had a knack for sensing Jack's moods, always there with a wagging tail and a nudge of his cold nose when the boy needed comfort. That Christmas Eve had been no different. Jack and Cooper had spent the day playing in the snow, their laughter ringing out as they built a lopsided snowman in the front yard. Melissa had been in the kitchen baking cookies, the smell of cinnamon and vanilla wafting through the house, while Daniel strung lights along the porch. It was a picture-perfect holiday scene. But life has a way of shattering even the most idyllic moments. Late that night, a knock came at the door. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch, his expression grim. There had been a car accident on the icy roads. A drunk driver had skidded into their lane. Daniel and Melissa were killed instantly. Jack, who had been spending the night at his grandmother's house, was spared the immediate horror, but his world was turned upside down in an instant. The farm was sold within weeks. Jack went to live with his grandmother in Denver, and Cooper was meant to join them. But somewhere in the chaos of grief and moving, the dog had slipped away. No one knew where he'd gone, and in the haze of their pain, the Thompsons assumed he had run off for good. Jack cried himself to sleep for weeks, clutching Cooper's frayed leash like a lifeline. What no one realized was that Cooper had returned to the farm. It was the last place he'd seen his family together, the last place that felt like home. And so he waited. Year after year, through snowstorms and bitter winds, Cooper lay under that oak tree, his eyes scanning the horizon for a car that would never come. Locals left scraps of food and water for him, but he never let anyone get close. His heart was tethered to the memory of a family that no longer lived there. This year, as the first snow of the season fell, Ghost appeared again, his thin frame trembling against the cold wind. But something was different. Claire, who had watched him from a distance for years, noticed that his steps were slower, his breathing more labored. The winters had taken their toll, and Ghost's once vibrant spirit seemed to be fading. She decided she couldn't stand by any longer. Something had to be done. As Christmas approached, the town of Jackson Hole buzzed with its usual holiday cheer, families stringing lights on their porches, children rehearsing for the nativity play, and stores advertising festive sales. Yet, amid the festivities, Claire Simmons couldn't shake the image of Ghost lying alone under the oak tree. She had grown used to seeing him over the years, his resilience both inspiring and heartbreaking, but now his decline was undeniable. The once strong golden retriever who had braved the elements with stoic determination now limped visibly, his fur dull and patchy from neglect, and his frame alarmingly frail. Claire had always loved animals, her general store often doubling as a halfway house for strays until she could find them proper homes. But Ghost was different. He wasn't just a stray. He had a story, a purpose that no one fully understood. Still, she couldn't bear the thought of him spending another Christmas freezing to death in the snow. She decided to take action. Early one morning, armed with a warm blanket and a plate of roasted chicken, Claire made her way to the old Thompson farm. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pinkish hue over the endless expanse of snow. Ghost was there, as always, curled tightly in a ball beneath the oak tree. His breath came in soft puffs of mist, barely visible in the freezing air. "Hey there, boy," Claire said softly, her voice trembling with both cold and emotion. She knelt a few feet away, careful not to startle him. "You don't have to do this anymore. Let me help you." Ghost raised his head weakly, his amber eyes meeting hers. For a moment, Claire thought he might come to her, but then he let out a low whine and turned his head away. His body language was clear. He was still waiting. For someone else. Claire's heart ached as she placed the plate of chicken on the ground and unfolded the blanket, hoping he might take comfort in its warmth. But Ghost didn't move. She stayed with him for hours, watching as he dozed fitfully, his thin frame shivering despite the feeble sunlight. When she finally left, tears streaked her cheeks. She wasn't sure how much longer he could survive. Word spread quickly through town that Claire was trying to help Ghost. Some residents applauded her efforts, while others shrugged it off, claiming the dog was beyond saving. But one person's interest was piqued in a way no one could have anticipated. 3 days before Christmas, Claire was restocking shelves in her store when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a teenage boy, his cheeks pink from the cold, standing hesitantly in the doorway. He clutched a leash in one hand, a leash that was frayed at the edges, its once bright blue color faded with age. "Excuse me," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard about the dog. The one by the Thompson farm. They say he's been waiting there for years. Is it true?" Claire blinked, taken aback by the intensity in the boy's eyes. "Yes, it's true," she said. "His name is Ghost. Well, that's what we call him. Do you know him?" The boy stepped closer, his fingers tightening around the leash. "His name isn't Ghost," he said, his voice trembling. "It's Cooper. He's my dog." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. She had heard whispers about the tragedy that had struck the Thompson family years ago, but had never connected the dots. Now, staring at the boy, Jack Thompson, no longer the child he'd been when he left town, she understood. Jack explained how he had never stopped thinking about Cooper, even as the years passed. His grandmother had told him the dog must have run off or been taken in by another family. But deep down, Jack had always wondered if Cooper was still out there, waiting. When a friend from Jackson Hole sent him a photo of the dog by the oak tree, the pieces clicked into place. Jack had begged his grandmother to let him return to Jackson Hole for Christmas, determined to see if the dog was really Cooper. "I need to go to him," Jack said, his voice urgent. "If he's been waiting all this time, I need to let him know I didn't forget about him." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "He's still there," she said, "but he's not doing well. You need to hurry." Jack didn't waste a second. That afternoon, Claire drove him to the farm. The boy sat silently in the passenger seat, clutching the leash like a lifeline. When they arrived, the sight of the once vibrant dog lying so still under the oak tree nearly broke him. Jack stepped out of the car, his boots crunching in the snow, and knelt a few feet away from the dog who had been his best friend. "Cooper," Jack called softly, his voice cracking. "It's me. It's Jack." The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, painfully, Ghost lifted his head. His amber eyes locked onto the boy's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a burst of energy that seemed to defy his frail condition, the dog scrambled to his feet, his tail wagging weakly but unmistakably. "Cooper!" Jack cried, tears streaming down his face as the dog staggered toward him. Jack opened his arms, and Cooper collapsed into them, burying his face in the boy's chest. It was as if 4 years of waiting, of loneliness and longing, melted away in that single moment. Claire watched from a distance, tears streaming freely down her face. It was a Christmas miracle, one that no one in Jackson Hole would soon forget. As Jack held Cooper in his arms, the boy's sobs mixed with the soft, mournful whimpers of the dog who had waited so long. Cooper's thin frame trembled with the effort it had taken to rise and move, but his wagging tail revealed a glimmer of joy that had seemed extinguished by years of suffering. Jack whispered to him, stroking the matted fur along his neck. "I'm so sorry, Cooper. I didn't know you were here. I thought you were gone," he murmured, his voice breaking with guilt and love. "I'll never leave you again. Promise." But as much as Cooper's spirit was reignited by Jack's return, his body told a different story. The years in the snow, the starvation, the cold, all had taken a toll on the dog who had once bounded across the farm with endless energy. When Jack tried to guide him toward the car, Cooper collapsed in the snow, his legs giving out beneath him. "Cooper!" Jack cried, his heart seizing with fear. He knelt beside the dog, who looked up at him with tired but trusting eyes. "We have to get him help," Jack said, turning toward Claire, who stood watching with tears in her eyes. Claire nodded quickly. "Let's get him to Dr. Bennett. He's the only vet in town. But if anyone can help Cooper, it's him." Jack scooped Cooper into his arms, cradling him as if he were made of glass. The dog's once thick golden fur was brittle and thin, his body so light it felt almost weightless. Jack climbed into Claire's car, holding Cooper close, whispering reassurances to him as the car sped toward the small veterinary clinic at the edge of town. Dr. Bennett was an older man with a kind face and hands that had healed countless animals over the years. When Claire and Jack burst through the door, he took one look at Cooper and knew the situation was dire. "Get him on the table," Dr. Bennett instructed, his voice calm but firm. He moved quickly, listening to Cooper's heart, checking his temperature, and examining his frail body. Jack stood nearby, his fists clenched and his heart pounding, every second feeling like an eternity. After what felt like hours, Dr. Bennett turned to Jack, his expression grave. "This dog has been through a lot," he said gently. "He's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and his muscles have deteriorated from years of exposure to the elements. He's also showing signs of frostbite on his paws and tail." Jack's eyes filled with tears. "But he's alive," he said, his voice shaking. "He came back to me. That has to mean something, right?" Dr. Bennett placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "It means he has an incredible will to live. But it's going to take a lot of care to get him back on his feet, if he can recover at all. We'll do everything we can, but you need to prepare yourself. He's not out of the woods yet." Jack nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do." Over the next several days, Jack rarely left Cooper's side. Dr. Bennett allowed him to stay in the clinic after hours, where he slept on a cot next to Cooper's bed. The dog was hooked up to an 4 for fluids and nutrients, and his frostbitten paws were wrapped in bandages. Jack spent hours talking to him, his voice a soothing balm for the dog's weary soul. "Remember when we used to chase fireflies in the summer?" Jack whispered one night, stroking Cooper's head as the dog lay curled on his bed. "You'd always catch them in your mouth and then let them go. Mom used to laugh so hard. She said you were too gentle to hurt anything." Cooper's tail gave a faint wag, the first sign of movement Jack had seen in hours. The sight brought a lump to Jack's throat, but it also filled him with hope. Outside the clinic, News of Cooper's reunion with Jack spread like wildfire. The people of Jackson Hole, many of whom had grown used to the sight of the lonely dog under the oak tree, were moved by the story. Neighbors began stopping by the clinic to offer support, some bringing food for Jack, others leaving donations to help cover Cooper's medical bills. Even Claire, who had always been a practical woman, found herself leaving small Christmas gifts outside the clinic door. A soft blanket, a bag of treats, a framed photo of the Thompson farm in its heyday. But as Christmas Eve approached, Cooper's condition remained precarious. Though he was eating small amounts of food and responding to Jack's presence, his body struggled to recover from the years of neglect. Jack refused to give up, but the fear of losing Cooper weighed heavily on him. On the night of December 23rd, Jack sat alone with Cooper, the clinic quiet except for the hum of the machines keeping the dog stable. Snow fell softly outside the window, blanketing the world in silence. Jack rested his head against Cooper's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. "Please, Cooper," Jack whispered, his voice breaking. "I need you to get better. I don't know if I can lose you again. You're my best friend. You're my family." As if hearing the raw desperation in Jack's voice, Cooper stirred. His eyes opened slowly, and for the first time in days, they seemed to hold a spark of life. He nudged Jack's hand with his nose, his tail giving a faint wag. Jack's heart leapt. "You're still in there, aren't you?" Jack said, his voice filled with wonder. "You're still fighting." The next morning, on Christmas Eve, Dr. Bennett arrived at the clinic to find Jack and Cooper sitting together in the small patch of sunlight streaming through the window. Cooper was weak, but he was alert, his head resting on Jack's lap as the boy gently stroked his fur. "He's turning a corner," Dr. Bennett said with a smile. "It's a long road ahead, but I think he's going to make it." For the first time in years, Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. Cooper had waited for him through 4 long winters, and now it was his turn to wait, to fight, to make sure his best friend got the life he deserved. The sun rose on Christmas morning, painting the snow-covered town of Jackson Hole in hues of gold and pink. Inside the small veterinary clinic, a quiet miracle was unfolding. Cooper, the dog who had waited for 4 long winters beneath the oak tree, stirred in his bed, his tail wagging weakly as Jack knelt beside him. The boy's eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, but his face glowed with relief and joy. "You're a fighter, Cooper," Jack whispered, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. "You've always been a fighter." Dr. Bennett had been cautiously optimistic when he arrived that morning to check on Cooper's progress. The dog was still frail, his recovery far from guaranteed, but there was a resilience in his spirit that seemed to defy logic. Cooper's body might have been battered by years of neglect, but his heart, his unshakable loyalty, remained strong. Jack, however, was determined to do more than just help Cooper survive. He wanted to give his dog a new life, one filled with the love and warmth he had lost. And so, with the support of Dr. Bennett and Claire, Jack began the painstaking process of nursing Cooper back to health. The first few weeks were difficult. Cooper's body was weak, his legs unsteady from years of underuse. Jack spent hours each day coaxing him to stand, using soft encouragements and gentle touches to rebuild the dog's strength. Claire, who had grown deeply invested in their story, brought over special high-protein meals she prepared herself, hoping to help Cooper regain weight. Dr. Bennett checked in regularly, adjusting treatments as needed and marveling at the bond between the boy and his dog. "Most animals would have given up after what he's been through," Dr. Bennett said one afternoon, watching as Jack guided Cooper across the clinic's floor, his hands steadying the dog's wobbling legs. "But not him. I've never seen a dog so devoted to someone. It's like he held on all these years just to see you again." Jack's chest tightened at the words, but he didn't reply. Instead, he crouched down beside Cooper, looking into the dog's amber eyes. "We're going to get through this," he said quietly. Together, as the weeks turned into months, the progress was slow but steady. Cooper's fur, once matted and dull, began to regain its golden sheen. His ribs, once visible beneath his skin, were now less pronounced as his body filled out. And though his steps were still hesitant, each one was a victory, a testament to his determination and the love that surrounded him. The town rallied around them, their story becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. People stopped Jack on the street to ask about Cooper's progress, their faces lighting up at the boy's updates. Donations continued to pour in, covering the cost of Cooper's medical care and leaving enough to provide for his long-term needs. Even the local newspaper ran a story about the dog who had waited for 4 Christmases, inspiring readers far beyond the borders of Jackson Hole. But for Jack, the true reward was seeing the light return to Cooper's eyes. The dog who had once been a shadow of himself now wagged his tail with cautious excitement, his ears perking up at the sound of Jack's voice. Each day felt like a small miracle, a gift that neither boy nor dog took for granted. One crisp spring morning, Jack decided it was time to take Cooper back to the farm, the place where it had all begun. The oak tree still stood at the edge of the property, its branches stretching skyward as if reaching for the heavens. Jack parked the car by the roadside, then helped Cooper out, his movements careful and deliberate. The dog hesitated for a moment, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Then, with a surprising burst of energy, he began to walk toward the tree. Jack followed, his heart pounding as he watched Cooper navigate the uneven terrain. The dog paused beneath the oak, his head tilting slightly as if listening to a memory carried on the wind. For a moment, Jack felt the weight of the past, the laughter that had once filled this place, the love that had been lost. But as he stood beside Cooper, he realized something important. They were creating new memories, ones that honored the past while looking toward the future. "You're home, Cooper," Jack said softly, kneeling beside the dog. "We both are." The weeks that followed marked a new chapter for both of them. Jack, now 16, found himself drawn back to the town he had once called home. His grandmother, moved by his transformation and determination, agreed to let him stay in Jackson Hole, enrolling him in the local high school so he could finish his studies. Claire offered him a part-time job at her general store, where he quickly became a favorite among the customers. And Cooper, ever the faithful companion, became a fixture in town, his golden fur gleaming as he trotted alongside Jack. By the time Christmas rolled around again, the transformation was complete. Cooper, though older and a bit slower, was the picture of health and happiness. Jack, too, had grown, his once fractured heart pieced back together by the unwavering bond he shared with his dog. On Christmas Eve, Jack and Cooper returned to the oak tree, the snow crunching beneath their feet as they stood beneath its sprawling branches. Jack had brought a wreath of evergreen and holly, which he hung on the tree in memory of his parents. He stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on Cooper's back, the dog's warmth a comforting presence against the cold. "I think they'd be proud of us," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cooper leaned against him, his tail wagging gently, as if to agree. That night, as they sat by the fire in their small rented house, Jack looked at Cooper, who lay curled at his feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. The dog had waited for 4 long winters, enduring unimaginable hardships, but his faith had never wavered. And in the end, it was that faith, his steadfast loyalty, that had brought them back to each other. "You saved me, Cooper," Jack said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You waited for me, and you saved me." Cooper opened his eyes briefly, his gaze meeting Jack's, and let out a soft, contented sigh. For the first time in years, they were both home. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the small living room where Jack and Cooper rested together. Outside, the snow fell in gentle flakes, blanketing the world in a quiet peace that only Christmas could bring. Jack sat cross-legged on the floor, his hand resting on Cooper's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Cooper stirred slightly, his golden fur shimmering in the firelight. Though his body bore the scars of his long, lonely winters, his spirit was unbroken. He had waited, through blizzards and bitter cold, through hunger and exhaustion, because his love for Jack had never faltered. And now, with his boy beside him once more, he could finally rest, knowing his wait had not been in vain. As Jack watched his dog sleep, memories of their life together filled his mind. chasing fireflies on summer nights, running through the woods behind the farm, curling up together during thunderstorms. He realized that Cooper had not only been his companion but his anchor, the one constant in a life that had been turned upside down by loss. And in the years that followed the accident, when Jack had felt lost and untethered, it was Cooper's silent, unwavering loyalty that had kept their bond alive. Jack wiped a tear from his cheek, a mix of sorrow and gratitude swelling in his chest. He thought of his parents and the life they had built together on the farm, and he felt a quiet certainty that they were watching over him, proud of the love he and Cooper had fought to preserve. "You waited for me," Jack whispered, his voice breaking. "You never gave up on me. I don't deserve you, Coop, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kind of love you've given me." Cooper's tail thumped softly against the floor, as if to say he understood. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow like a million tiny diamonds. Jack and Cooper went for a walk through town, the cold air biting at their cheeks. Neighbors waved from their porches, smiling as they saw the boy and his dog together again. The people of Jackson Hole had watched the story unfold from afar, and to see it end in redemption and hope filled their hearts with quiet joy. When they returned home, Jack pulled a small package from beneath the Christmas tree. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather collar with Cooper's name engraved in shining gold letters. He knelt down and fastened it gently around the dog's neck. "Merry Christmas, Cooper," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my miracle." As the day passed, Jack and Cooper stayed side by side, their bond stronger than ever. For Jack, Christmas no longer felt like a season of loss. It was a reminder of the love that endured, the kind of love that waits, even through the coldest winters, even when all hope seems lost. Cooper stretched out beside him, his amber eyes gazing up at the boy he had waited for, the boy who had finally come back to him. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of home and the promise of the future, Jack realized something profound. Love, the kind that Cooper had shown him, was more powerful than anything, more enduring than grief, more unshakable than time. The dog who had slept in the snow for 4 long Christmases had finally found his way home. And Jack, in finding Cooper again, had found his way too. Their story, born of loss but forged in hope, was a testament to the resilience of love. For Jack and Cooper, this Christmas marked the end of waiting and the beginning of a new chapter. A life filled with the promise of brighter days and the unbreakable bond of a boy and his dog.